Hi everyone, meteorologist Brian Bennett, and here's a quick update for your Thursday evening, September 7th. As you've probably heard by now, the National Hurricane Center track has shifted westward about 40 miles, and that means that the storm has a potential to impact many more Floridians with stronger winds and heavier rain. Right now, the forecast track brings the storm into southern Florida Sunday morning as a major hurricane. That's why there is a hurricane watch indicated by the pink color here. And then the storm rides north and gradually weakens as it moves up towards Georgia and eventually towards the Appalachians. That is the latest track from the National Hurricane Center. All right, there are three models that I like to reference when it comes to hurricanes. Models that I've used for many years now, and I've found to be the more accurate models. One is the European, one is the GFS, the American model, and the other is the H-Wharf model. And really, there's not a huge difference in what these models are calling for. The European model is calling for the storm to make landfall right around Everglades City and then to ride north throughout the state of Florida, pretty much down the spine of the state. That's the European model. The GFS model is being a little more conservative, bringing the storm into southeast Florida and then riding the storm a little closer to the east coast of Florida. And then the H-Wharf model, another very reliable model, is bringing in the storm right around Miami and then slowly taking it off to the northeast and then kind of scraping the east coast of Florida as it continues to go north. So these are the most trusty models that we have access to, and there's really not a huge difference in these landfalls from a geographical standpoint. We're only talking about maybe 80 to 100 miles at best, but that 80 to 100 miles can make a huge difference in the amount of wind and the rain that we're going to see. All right, so let's take a look at the storm right now, and then I'll show you those actual computer models. The storm is still very strong. 175 mile per hour winds. It's moving off to the west-northwest at 16 miles per hour. It's a very complex storm to forecast. We have a Bermuda high that's pushing on it from the northeast. We have a ridge shooting down from Canada. We have an upper level trough up around Maine. We have wind shear. We have water vapor feeding into it, all type of different scenarios and parameters that feed into a hurricane. All that will result in exactly when it'll make its turn to the northeast. So very complex. Unfortunately, really, to be honest, our computer models have not advanced to the point where we can make that accurate of a prediction 3 to 4 days out, where we can pinpoint the exact city it's going to arrive in. That's why we have the forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. But models are getting better. Hurricane Center forecast is getting better. So we have narrowed it down to a landfall again between Everglades City and roughly the Fort Lauderdale area. Right now, though, the storm is north of Haiti, and it is moving off to the west-northwest, moving into the Bahamas tonight. Going to be a rough night in the Bahamas with very strong winds. All right, so here's a look at the three models. First, I want to show you the European. It's the more aggressive, the farther west model, and then the GFS, kind of more conservative, and then the H-Wharf, which takes the storm a bit farther east. And of course, for Tampa Bay, we're hoping the storm goes farther east and stays a little more farther offshore. And same thing goes for Miami. We would love for this storm to go out into the Atlantic Ocean and leave Florida alone. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen at this point. The question is, how much of an impact are we going to have from the storm? So here's the European model. You see it goes right over the Florida Keys, and then it makes landfall very early Sunday morning, right around Everglades City, and then it rides to the north. The center of circulation goes right over Polk County in eastern Tampa Bay, and sure enough, it goes right over Disney World. So even Mickey is seeing the center of circulation go right over the Magic Kingdom, and then the storm continues to ride off to the north. The entire time it goes north, it is weakening as it's not getting the latent heat energy. Basically, that's what fuels a hurricane. So the longer it's over the state of Florida, the weaker it's going to get as it goes off to the northeast. Or excuse me, the north. So that's a look at the European model. Here's a look at the European model rainfall. And if the storm goes right up the center of the state, then yeah, we're going to see a lot of rain for just about the entire state. And the purple color here, if you reference the legend, that's about 15 inches of rain for the Keys and southern part of Florida, mainly the Everglades, but even over to Marco Island and Naples as well. And then is when you get up into Polk County, we're looking at about 8 or 9 inches of rain, and that's the same thing that goes all the way up through Jacksonville and even Valdosta, Georgia. Tampa, based on that particular path, would just be a tiny bit west of the heaviest rain core, so that Tampa would have the potential to pick up about 5, maybe 6 inches of rain. St. Petersburg, same thing, and Sarasota, same thing. But again, if this path shifts just a tiny bit west, then those rain totals increase a tiny bit east, and the totals go down pretty quickly. You see, it's a pretty narrow path of heavy rain, and it depends on exactly where the storm goes. All right, so here's a look at the GFS model. Again, it's going for a landfall that's a bit farther to the east, but still one that has shifted westward since last night. So it has it making landfall in southeast Florida, kind of near the Homestead area, right around Sunday morning. As a very powerful hurricane, likely a Category 3 or 4 hurricane as it moves into South Florida. And here we are Sunday morning. The storm is moving very powerfully over Miami. This is a bad scenario for Miami. In fact, this could be a storm that could be compared to Hurricane Andrew and the force of the winds that it could bring on shore. All right, as the storm goes north, it continues to ride to the north, maybe even northeast a tiny bit, so impacting the entire east coast with very strong hurricane force winds. A lot of damage from this scenario, especially along the east coast of Florida. In this scenario, how much wind would the west coast of Florida have? Well, let's rewind the model. Here we are looking at Sunday evening, and you can see by the orangish color here representing our legend, that's around 60 knots, which is about 70 miles per hour, and that's a sustained winds. So we're looking at winds of 70 to 80 miles per hour for the Fort Myers and Naples area. And as we head eastward into, again, Miami to Fort Lauderdale to West Palm Beach, that's where the winds could reach possibly around 120 miles per hour in the coastal areas. Now, as you go inland, those winds will deteriorate quickly, but right along the coast, 120 mile per hour wind is definitely possible with this particular path. All right, let's look at Monday evening and into Sunday evening and early Monday night. And this is when the storm would impact Tampa Bay according to the GFS model. So we're looking at kind of the orangish color here. That is a sustained wind of right around 60 miles per hour. So 60 miles per hour gusting to maybe 75 miles per hour. So we're looking at 60 to 75 miles per hour winds, especially for the immediate coastline. Again, the winds unimpeded by any friction of the land, so a bit stronger by the coast, but still looking at pretty strong winds, enough to bring down a few trees and, of course, bring power outages to areas as well as those strong winds move across the state. Head inland to Polk County, closer to that center of circulation, and we're looking at winds sustained right around 75 knots, so that's about 85 miles per hour, possibly gusting to 90 to 95 miles per hour, so definitely the possibility for trees down and also power outages for inland areas like Polk County and Highlands County, and then coastal areas right around Cape Canaveral. You're looking at onshore winds blowing perhaps sustained close to 95 to 100 miles per hour. As the storm goes north, it'll rapidly weaken but still be a strong storm as it interrupts the southeast Georgia coast, the Georgia Bight, or perhaps even goes into the South Carolina coast, depending on exactly how far north the storm goes. But regardless, still hurricane force winds for the coast of Georgia and the Carolinas. That is a look at the GFS model. Here's a real quick look at the rainfall totals, and notice just that small little shift to the east change where that heaviest rain occurred. So if the GFS situation prevails, we're looking at 3 to 4 inches of rain in Tampa, St. Petersburg, and Sarasota. Head over to Lakeland, we're looking at about 5 or 6 inches of rain. Head over to the east coast of Florida, and we're looking at a foot of rain easily. Miami could pick up 13, 14, maybe 15 inches of rain, and then that's the same all the way up the east coast of Florida. See how that path of very heavy rain stays very close to the center of circulation. So again, I can't emphasize how important it is exactly where that center of circulation happens to go. All right, here's the H-Wharf model. This is a very good high resolution model, and this is the last one that I'm going to show you because basically these are the three most accurate models that we can look at. Let me quickly rewind this. All right, so same thing goes. The storm makes landfall on Sunday morning, very early in the morning, and this has the storm making landfall right around between Homestead and Miami, kind of resembling a bit of Andrew, right? Again, I hate to mention the name Andrew because that kind of sends shivers down our spine to remember that storm, but this does look like somewhat of a similar type of scenario with very strong winds and a very powerful hurricane. Regardless, as the storm moves on shore, we're looking at winds, according to the H-Wharf, blowing in the Miami area, possibly with gusts up to around 120 miles per hour, so a similar intensity. As the storm goes off to the north, they have it actually moving to the northeast, maybe even moving offshore for a little bit, which would be really good news for the Tampa Bay area to take the storm farther east. Just a little bit farther east would really reduce the winds that are seen in Tampa, Sarasota, and St. Petersburg area, but still very strong winds on the east coast of Florida from Cape Canaveral down to Vero Beach, Jupiter, West Palm Beach. Either way, you're looking at rough conditions from this storm. With this particular scenario, we would see winds in Polk County in the green here blowing about 40 miles per hour sustained, 40 knots I mean, which is about 50 miles per hour. So we're looking at wind gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour out of this storm. So 50 to 60 mile per hour winds in Polk County, enough to bring down a tree. And the same thing goes all the way up to Orlando as well. Perhaps 60 mile per hour wind gust, so we could see some trees down even in this scenario. Head westward from Lakeland over to perhaps the Tampa area, and we're seeing winds that aren't nearly as harsh. We're seeing sustained winds right around 40 miles per hour, maybe gusting to about 55. And then as you head closer to the coast, the winds do pick up again because the wind's unimpeded by the friction of the land. So anywhere in the beach locations, that includes Clearwater down to St. Pete Beach, all the way to Anna Maria, and all the way down to Sanibel Island, we could see winds in the green to yellow here, which is right around 45 knots, so about 55 miles per hour. Add in the wind gust, and we could see wind gusting around 65 miles per hour for the immediate coastal locations. So even a farther east track still does bring pretty strong winds, especially to our beach locations. So there are going to be a lot of trees down across Florida on Sunday and perhaps even into Sunday night. So the forestry company and the tree companies will be very busy getting the power lines back up and getting the trees off the power lines after this storm has passed off to the north. One very important thing to look at, though, is the wind direction. Pretty simple when it comes to storm surge. When the winds are blowing onshore, very strong, that's a big storm surge, right? When the storms are blowing offshore, that's not a very big storm surge because it's blowing the water away. So, as the storm first moves onshore, we're looking at the potential for perhaps a 1 to 3 foot storm surge for the Miami area with that onshore wind flow. For the Naples area, not looking at too much of a storm surge because the winds are blowing offshore. Taking the storm farther north, say to the Tampa Bay area, and the storm winds are blowing from roughly the north. Again, that's not a nice ideal setup for a very huge storm surge, so we're actually looking at a fairly minimal storm surge, just really large waves from this storm. So actually good news from a storm surge standpoint to have a storm on the east coast of Florida when it comes to the storm surge and Tampa Bay. And I'm focusing on Tampa Bay because Tampa Bay has one of the most at risk or most prone areas in the entire country for storm surge flooding. It could be catastrophic in this area if we were to get a hurricane off the Gulf of Mexico. And that doesn't look to be the case, so fortunately storm surge looks to be fairly minimal, but wind and rain do have the potential to make quite an impact on the Tampa Bay area and across much of Florida for that matter. Now, storm surge will pick up once we get into areas basically Cape Canaveral and north. That's where the bathymetry or the bottom of the ocean has a gradual increase kind of leading to a greater storm surge and also more marshy areas you head into the Georgia-Florida border, and that's where we could start to see even greater storm surge. Coastal Georgia could see a storm surge greater than 6 feet, maybe up to 8 feet. So very large storm surge possible in parts of Florida and Georgia with this storm. Here's a look at the latest spaghetti model plots, and they have shifted westward as well. And notice that the majority of the spaghetti plots take the storm pretty similar to the H Wharf and the GFS, basically into southeast Florida, scraping the east coast of Florida, and then making that turn to the northwest, all because of a blocking high up in the northern part of the United States, which I mentioned earlier this week, which will bring, again, rough conditions to Georgia and the Carolinas as we move into Monday. And notice that right now a lot of models aren't taking the storm right over Tampa and Sarasota. So for Tampa Bay, that's a bit of good news that we're still looking at a track that takes the storm a bit farther to the east. All right, what about storm surge? Obviously, as I mentioned, that's a huge component of a hurricane. Well, this is a map that shows you where storm surge could possibly be greater than 3 feet, and where you see the kind of the brownish color here, that's a decent likelihood of storm surge greater than 3 feet. So this is a rural area of the Everglades, which wouldn't really impact anybody. Here, though, on the southeast coast of Florida, we're looking at the possibility for greater than 3-foot storm surge in Homestead and areas east. So southern Miami could see a storm surge again right around 3 feet. Head north to Hollywood or perhaps northern Miami or Boca Raton, and we're really not looking at very much of a storm surge. So great news for that affluent area where there are a lot of very expensive boats and yachts reside in that area, that the storm surge shouldn't be too bad. As you ride up the east coast of Florida, we're looking at the storm surge possibilities start to increase gradually. So by the time you get to Melbourne, you're looking at the possibility for a 1 to 3 foot storm surge. And let me actually zoom this map out just a little bit. Let me quickly adjust the position here and zoom out a little bit to be able to show the Tampa Bay area. And you'll notice, hey, there's the Tampa Bay area, and only a marginal storm surge threat, kind of a low chance of a 3-foot storm surge for Anna Maria and immediate St. Pete Beach and Anna Maria Island. That's again due to those winds blowing out of the north as opposed to onshore winds from the southwest. Now as we head to the north towards Port Orange, Daytona Beach, Jacksonville, we're looking at a higher risk of storm surge, perhaps a storm surge closer to the 4-foot range by the time we get up into northeast Florida. And as you get up into the Jacksonville coastal area, we could see a storm surge of 5, maybe 6 feet. Get up into the more marshy area of Brunswick, Georgia, and up to Savannah. Of course, this depends on where the hurricane makes landfall or exactly the final path, but we could see a storm surge in the 6 to 8 foot range in coastal Savannah, Brunswick area, and that could be very catastrophic for that area, that possibly being one of the main impacts from this storm for Georgia and even South Carolina would be the storm surge. Again, for Tampa Bay, though, right now, based on the current path, storm surge seems to be a pretty minimal threat, and that is the most dangerous potential threat from a hurricane. So that is some good news. The bad news being that the path of the hurricane looks like it is going to shift westward a little bit, which is bringing us stronger winds and heavier rain than was indicated yesterday. But again, the storm's a couple of days out. We'll continue to watch it. Hope that the storm will continue to move to the east. I would love to see it move offshore so that Miami and folks on the East Coast would have a minimal impact as well. All right, guys, that's the latest update, and that's actually went a little longer than I intended, but I want to make sure I give you as much information as I can to help you make planning in case you're planning on evacuating or boarding up your home. Of course, I'll have another update tomorrow with the latest information, which will hopefully be hurricane tracks a bit farther east. All right, guys, hope you have a great and safe evening.